start. I'll go ahead and hit record. And I'll start the video. So I just wanted to welcome you to class. This is our last week. This is week 4, and I don't know about you, but it's a little bittersweet because we end the class, but then I don't see you guys until you take another class from me. But I hope that you are enjoying this class. I hope you're having fun being creative and kind of exploring your creative side. We're going to be talking about grids and magazine and article layout today. And so I've got quite a few things that I want to show you. And what I'm going to do is get started with the slides. So let me pull these up real quick, and we'll do a little bit of housekeeping, and then we will jump right into it. So before we begin, are there any questions that you want to ask? Can I help answer anything about the assignment, about last week, about this week? Any other questions before we dive into the material? Any questions? Well, I want to welcome Ashley and Terry to class today, and those of you who will be watching via the recording at home, appreciate you coming. If you do have questions, you can always email me. If you do need help between now and the multi-session, please go to the Student Success Center and go seek some help there. There's tutors and learning coaches there that can help you and will answer the questions, if not better than I can. So they know the course material and they're very familiar with it and can help you navigate your InDesign. So let's talk a little bit about what's going to be expected for the final. There was a little bit of confusion last week, and I do apologize. That was my fault. We didn't cover character styles and paragraph styles. I think we ran out of time to do that. So you have not been graded on that. We will cover it in class today, but you won't, I don't think you'll necessarily need it for the assignment. At least I don't think you'll be graded on it. It's not on the grading rubric, but I will teach it to you so that you know it. And then also we'll be going over our final project, and the demo will be a lot similar to what we did last week, but I just wanted to kind of touch on it again so that we're all aware. Now, this final project will allow you to visually demonstrate your understanding of what you've been learning in this class regarding typography in this entire mod. And you're going to be utilizing your letter forms to create positive and negative space, using word and paragraphs to create visual meaning and basic typesetting. We learned some basic typesetting last week. And it will also introduce you to an understanding of designing within a grid system. So we're going to be talking about why is a grid system important, what is it, and then how do we use it for this project. So you'll design a 2-page magazine spread article. Now, have you guys looked at the final project requirements? Or do you know what you're doing for the final project yet? It's okay if you haven't had a chance to look. That's while we're here. Okay, those of you who have seen it, you are vaguely familiar with it. Some of you last week did the 2-page spread, which was in the demo that I started. It was kind of part 1 of the final. Those of you who have done that 2-page spread already are kind of miles ahead of the game. So I gave you some feedback. Just tweak it and then make sure that you include the elements that the final project requires, and then it's ready to turn in. So if you want, come on Wednesday during the multi-session, and I'd be happy to pre-grade your final project so that if you want to, make some tweaks before you submit, and you can get a grade on the spot. So I love doing that. Students love doing that. So I hope that you take advantage of that opportunity. Okay, so it looks like one of you has already looked at this, but I'll just kind of briefly touch on it. This article, this 2-page spread, like we like to call it, this article will serve as an informational piece. So remember that research paper that you wrote during week 2? This is what you're going to be using. So you used it last week for the layout. You're going to use it again. So this is going to be about the history and the background of the typeface. It's going to talk about who designed it, why and how it was used. So you're going to be using your research paper. If you were short on the word count, you are going to need to add to it, because if you're short on the word count on week 2, you're gonna really need more content. So I don't care if you grab it from Google or whatever, but I want it to be formatted and structured correctly. I am merely grading on aesthetics and layout at this point, and your technique and how you laid things out. Did you use the grid system? And then did you include the elements? So as far as content is concerned, I'm not going to be reading it or proofreading it, but I do want it formatted correctly. You will have to watch for spelling for your headline or your headers and your subheaders, because those will be obvious. But for the most part, I'm not going to be reading the content. I just want to know, can you format correctly? So that's what we're focusing on in this assignment. So a typographic grid organizes text and images across the pages of a document. We're going to be learning what a grid does. A grid can consist of one single column framed by margins, or it can have multiple columns, and we'll learn how to structure that as you move up into the amount of columns. It's up to you to choose how many columns you want. I encourage you to do at least a 3 or 4 column grid, because that's usually typical in the magazine industry. Oftentimes you'll see that type of that amount of columns used in the grid system. So when you design a grid, you typically begin with vertical divisions of columns and then add horizontal divisions such as rows. And we'll get into I'll demo that. So does everyone have InDesign pulled up? Great question, Ashley. The multi-sessions are on Wednesday, same time as class lecture. So 7:30 to 9:30 Mountain Standard Time. Great question. Okay, pull up your InDesign, and we're going to kind of go back and forth a little bit between slides and our layouts, but we're going to also format our document so we can get it set up correctly. You will be graded on, did you use correct margins, and did you include all the elements? The grading rubric is posted, so you do need to make sure you check that before you submit to make sure you've actioned everything on there. This is worth 185 points, so if you do very well on this, this can make up for any lost discussion that you might have missed, or if you didn't do so hot on the daily checkpoints, this will greatly help. So this is above all what you need to turn in, and then Saturday is also the last week to turn in week 3 late work. Any other work that is beyond week 3 is no longer being accepted. So please be aware of that, and just kind of spend your time wisely on the kind of prioritize with these assignments. So about 1/3 to half of your composition needs to be dedicated to a graphic display. We're going to talk about that a little bit. This will be designed only using your typographic elements. I don't want to see backgrounds or JPEGs or pictures or anything like that. I want you to use your typography as art. I've had some students take their Illustrator, the portrait they did in Illustrator, and they use that as some of the art. That was kind of cool. But the font in the illustration does need to match the font that you are writing about. So if you did something on Times New Roman, but you wrote about Helvetica, that's not going to work. You kind of have to feature what you're writing about, okay? All right, and we're going to be talking about much, much more, but I just wanted to touch on this. Are there any questions about the final project so far? Okay, and now Ashley asked a great question. Is there another time for a multi-session because I have work on Wednesday at that time? That's a great question, Ashley, and you're not the only one. If your schedule conflicts with my multi-sessions, there are multi-sessions being held throughout the week by other instructors. Just because they teach a different class does not mean that you can't attend. In fact, their schedules are posted under the announcement section of the course homepage. So if you go under the announcements, and then if you look for, let's see, what's it called? It's called multi-session schedule for the mod. And if you click on that, it will give you a schedule, and you can join any one of the multi-sessions for any assistance with your design, okay? And it's just the IU schedule for the entire mod. So instructors from all over are holding times all throughout the day, different days of the week. So you don't have to attend mine, okay? But it is very beneficial if you do attend. Now, if that schedule doesn't work with your schedule, then there's always the Student Success Center, and you can go at your convenience. You don't need an appointment for these. You just go and attend. So does that help, Ashley? It's a really good question. I'm sure others have had that question before. All right, awesome. So let's move on. We do have a lot to cover, and I definitely want to make sure we save room for the demo. Can you guys see my slides okay? Okay, so let's talk about the elements of a page. These are elements that you're going to be held accountable for. You're going to need to know how to lay these out properly. I will demo these. I did touch on it last week, so some of this should be a refresher, but let's talk about the top margin. Now the top margin, when you set up your margins, will be that purple outline that you see on your page. And that is your margin line. And you can't see it here, but your margin kind of just is within the page specifications, and you can change and adjust the size. You're given certain specs or certain margin dimensions to include, so it will give you very specifics on these, but you will have a margin. Header is usually the headline, and then can you guys spot the byline? Can you see where the byline is? I know it's hard to see in this slide, but you guys see the byline anywhere? Okay, it's really small. It's under the header, under the R. It's really fine print right here. It's called the byline. That means it's by whoever, it's the author's name. So it'll say by, and if you were the one that wrote the article, it'll say by Ashley Rains or by Terry Dent. Whoever wrote the article, that's where you'll put it. So you will need to include a byline. So you're the author of the article, so you'll need to put your name. You'll need to put a byline and put your name there, and that usually is positioned under the header. Okay. Then we talked about a grid system. We'll be talking about more of it today. A grid system is just how many columns do you have organized per page. So can you tell me, just kind of looking at this, what is the grid system here? How many columns do we have? Not total, but per page. 3, right? So this is a 3-column grid. That's what we call it. So a 3-column grid. This is probably one of my favorite grid systems to lay out. 3 is, I mean, in the design world, we always abide by the rule of thirds. You'll hear that a little bit more as you move through these courses. And the rule of thirds is really important because it creates balance for the eye. And so a 3-column grid is a really popular grid layout system to use. And so I really encourage you to stick with maybe a 3-column grid. You could even go up to 4. You don't really see 2-column grids all that much. The more columns, though, the less text you'll need, if that makes sense. If you have a short article, but you have 4 or 5 columns, they'll be really skinny columns, so not a lot of text will fit in them. So it'll kind of stretch your text out to the, kind of make it look like you have more text than you actually do. If you do have a lot of text, then the fewer columns is probably the best bet to go. So this is a 3-column grid. Now, the gutter, have you guys heard of the gutter before? Does anyone know what the gutter is? You've heard this before. Ashley, what's the gutter?
It's with the gap between the columns.
Absolutely, great job. Yeah, it's the gap between the columns. You see this white space here? Each column is divided by a gutter, and you can set the gutter up to specifications in whatever size you want. There can be more or less space between these text boxes. This serves a really important purpose. Can anyone tell me why this is important? Why do we need a gutter? Anybody? What do you think a gutter, what purpose do you think it serves?
It helps it look more clean.
Absolutely. It keeps our text from running into each other, right? Our text boxes from touching. Absolutely. Yeah. And then Terry says, so the column won't run together. Exactly. So it gives it a cleaner look, just like Ashley said. And then Terry's right. It keeps the text from running into each other. So it gives it some breathing room. You'll often hear me say, give it breathing room. We want that little bit of white space in between the columns of text. I'll be looking for this when I'm grading. I don't want to see columns of text close together. You have the space. This is 2 pages. So I really want to see you give it that breathing room that it deserves. And plus, it's best for you because then you don't have to come up with as much content. Again, the narrower the column, the less text you have to fit in there. All right, and then these outside margins and inside margins should be evenly spaced. So if you have, let's say, 1/4 of an inch space on the outside of the page to the first text box, you need to have that same even amount of space from the inside of the page to the last text box. Does that make sense? So we'll need to make sure that the spacing on all of your margins are even, top, bottom, left, right, okay? And the gutter spacing needs to be even, and then your columns obviously need to be the same size. But the way we'll set up our document is kind of a fail-proof way of keeping everything consistent if we kind of follow the rules. I had some students asking, what is a pull quote? We didn't get to that last week, and I do apologize. We will be talking about it today because you will be graded on it. A pull quote is, cool. Can anyone tell me what a pull quote is? I like to hear you talk more than me. Yeah, exactly. Terry says something pulled from text. So you'll basically take your article, and if there was an interesting quote that was used, or if you quoted an article that you saw, or there was something in your article that you want to highlight, we call it a pull quote, which means you'll pull it out. You still use it in your article, but you'll kind of place it somewhere on one of the two pages. Sometimes they're positioned within the column. Sometimes they overlap all the columns, and I'll show you an example of that right here. Let's see if I can fit this in. Okay, so do you see this grapefruit article? Look at that pull quote. It overlaps all three columns and it's centered. So there's really no real rule for where the pull quote will be positioned, but please make it so that it looks like it belongs there and it's not off center or unevenly placed. It's evenly placed over the center of that column, so it looks really nice even though it overlaps all three. So I'll show you how to do that as well. But then as you can see, this pull quote is just bigger within the column. So you can do either or. Sometimes the pull quotes aren't even in the article. Sometimes they place them next to a graphic. So it can really be up to you. You're the designer. It's just whatever looks and appeals to you. You have subheaders, though you aren't required to have them, but kind of decide, am I going to have a subheader or am I going to indent my paragraphs? If you're going to be doing hard returns on your paragraphs, I suggest maybe putting subheaders there to kind of break up the text. They also add as like a visual aesthetic, like another element that kind of adds interest to the page. Instead of seeing running columns of text, everything's all the same, black, mundane. But with subheaders, it breaks up the sections a little bit and it kind of adds a little visual interest to the page. So that's why it's kind of important to have. Let's see. I think that, where it says folio 2 and folio 1, you'll want to set this up too, and I'll show you how to do that. This is what we call your footer, and you'll need to do this on your master pages, and I'll show you how to set that up. It is really important to have these because as you do multiple pages in your InDesign, if you're designing for a book or a magazine, you're not going to want to have to label each page manually. This is going to be a way to set it up so as you add pages, it just automatically puts it on there for you. Ashley has a question, so let me read it real quick. One question you have is show us how to do this, it would be great. One issue I ran into while working on last week's assignment that I had a hard time changing measurement settings from inches to pica, so you were wondering if you could pause it. Yeah, absolutely, Ashley, and I can do that right now. So let's go to InDesign. So we'll switch gears here for a minute. A good question. I'll pull up my InDesign. So Ashley, your question is pertaining to if your default settings are in picas, how do you switch to inches?
The opposite, actually. They were in inches, but it said something about picas in the live session, and I'd never heard of them before, so I was like, what the heck is a pica?
Okay, so pica is just an increment of measurement that InDesign uses. Don't ask me what the mathematical calculation is to inches, but what's really cool about InDesign is no matter what, I mean, I think you can go into your preferences and kind of change it. I'm not quite sure where. I'd probably have to Google that for you. I've never had to change my my settings before, but I will show you that mine is in picas, and this is how I get around it. When you're setting up a new document and it pulls up your new document dialog box, and go ahead and pull up a new document dialog box and we can do this together. We'll set up our InDesign. So if everyone's watching, pull up your InDesign and we'll set up our final project document together, okay? We'll get the specs all laid out so that when we come back from the break, we can just jump right into the design. Okay, so right now it's in inches. So it says the top margin needs to be 0.625 inches. So this is a decimal, but if you'll notice, I'm in picas. Now in Illustrator, you do have the option of changing the increment of measurement. You can do points, picas, pixels, whatever, inches, millimeters. It gives you a lot of options, but in InDesign, you're just limited to whatever you have, your presets are. Now, if your presets don't match what this is asking, I can show you. So instead, you're going to want to deselect, because we're going to have different values for the inside, outside, top, and bottom. This little chain link will make all the settings the same, and we don't want that. So you want to click on it, break the chain, okay, right there, and then now we can start entering our values. So let's start at the top of the page. We want this to be a 2-page spread, and then we want that facing pages box selected, okay, because what that's going to do is put the pages side by side for us, and that's what we want for a 2-page layout. And then it'll ask what starting page. You want it to start on page 2, okay? And that's because if we said starting page on 1, we'd have an extra page, and we don't want an extra page. So we're going to just say start on page 2. This will make it a lot easier when we're uploading the PDF. So no, Terry, you're correct. So the specs for the InDesign document are in inches. So if you're using inches, that's just fine. Mine happen to be set up in picas. You'll have to go into your preferences, Ashley, and change it if that's what you want to do. But I'll show you a quick, easy way of doing this. The top margin is 0.625 inches, but right now I'm in picas. So what I'm going to do is type in the value 0.625, and you'll have to type out the word inches or use the quote for inches or IN. Whoops, sorry. Don't hit enter. All right, we want facing pages 2 to break the chain, 0.625 inches, hit tab, okay? So now my value, it converted it into whatever the value is for picas per inches, and that's fine. But because I typed in inches after the decimal, it now converted it to the correct dimensions. So let's do the outside. The outside is 0.625 as well. 0.625 inches, but you'll have to type in inches or IN or the quote, hit tab. All right, and then the inside is 0.75, but you have to remember to put inches so that it converts the value. And then the let's see, the bottom is 0.875 inches, so 0.875 inches. Hit tab. Okay, so now all you're looking for is that the top and the outside have the same value, and then the inside and the bottom are different values, okay? So does that make sense, Ashley? Does that help answer your question? Okay, perfect. So so with that, you'll keep the page size, letter, orientation, portrait, that all stays the same. If you hit preview, it'll let you see what it's doing. So when you hit OK, this is the document that you're left with. So your document should look like mine with these thick margin lines. Now, can you tell me where the margin lines are on my page? Can anyone tell me which ones are the margin lines? Or rather, what color? Yeah, they're the pink purple lines, right? These purple and pink. The pink are the top and bottom margin lines, and the purple ones are the left and the right margin lines. Here's a trick to laying out. When you're doing your columns, I want you to lay out within the margin lines. Don't have your text box overlap that margin line, okay? I don't want to see you laying out columns that start beyond the margin line. Oops. Let's see if I can do this. And I don't want to see text boxes hanging over the margin line, okay? So the way to do that is when we set up our grid system, it'll kind of already have it set up for us, but I want you to be within the margin lines. And this will help you keep a consistent spacing on the left and on the right, okay? As well as inside, but that's the most important there, okay? And then let's see. Okay, I think that was it. No, was there another part to your question, Ashley? Was there another question in there? I want to make sure I adjust it. Okay, perfect. All right, good. So let's go back here. There we go. All right, so we're going to move on here. Let's talk about the function of a grid real quick. We'll be talking about what are grids, using grids. All right, so you'll notice that breaks in space into regular balanced units. Grids are important because they establish a system for placing your content within a space. Grids kind of give you structure, and it's all about you having control of your design. It kind of keeps things uniform, and it gives you this skeletal structure that really helps define your space, okay? And it helps you as a designer kind of not lose track of where you're going. So grids are your friends. There are different types of grids. There's a baseline grid that I went over last week, and I'll show you how to set that up. There's a 12-column grid for digital applications, and this gives you flexibility for any type of adaptation. So I'll show you this right here. This is kind of interesting. So the more columns you have, or the fewer columns you have, the wider the columns will be. And there's lots of different ways to kind of lay that out. It's also important to note that columns are really essential tools to standardize your layout. Now, some would say, well, how does this help me be creative? This is a great way to be creative. All this is doing is organizing your content, and then your actual typographic illustration or design can be off the grid, but it still kind of centers your layout. So these are going to help you in getting order and structure out of your layout, but do resist the temptation to think into standard format, because rigidity does dull the creativity, but this is going to give your layout structure. So to avoid the trap, you can play with column width and shapes. You can treat each article as a separate unit in a mix. The number of columns in each story. One story can be laid out on a 2-column grid, while the other can be laid out in 3 or 4 or more column grid. So today we're going to be talking more about columns as a design element, and in another separated, in another demo, we're going to talk about like the width of columns and the number of characters and line length and all of that jazz. So we'll be covering that a little bit, but let's go back to columns as a design element today. We're going to take a look at different column sizes. Now, the unwritten rule is to design more important stories on fewer columns. So if you were working for a newspaper, you probably wouldn't use very many columns. So for example, your main story in the magazine or in the newspaper should be done on a 2-column grid, but this will give you more importance to the story, and it looks more elegant, and the reader won't have to jump to the next line of text so often. So again, think about that too as they're reading. Less important stories like news sections, those can be laid out in 4 or more columns. So since these articles are shorter in length, they don't need wide columns like we talked about. They need more narrower columns if you have a shorter article. All right, and then depending on your design of various parts of your article layout, or your columns can vary in width, but they need to be uniform from page to page. So just make sure that you stay consistent from each page to each page. All right. Let me show you an example. Oops, that didn't go over well. Let me show you an example of a standard 2-column layout. So this is just an example, if you can see it. Standard 2-column layout. This is used mainly for important articles, like I said. You can also do something like this, where the 2 narrow columns with a sidebar. You have a little sidebar here. And in this case, placing a sidebar in between the columns will look really dull because it will be centered on the page. So leaving it on the side looks much more interesting and kind of adds some visual intrigue here. All right, and then as stated earlier, most used in top stories and in magazines are the 2-column grids, but again, don't use maximum space on the page. Make some room around the columns or give them some space. You can also make bigger outer margins and make 2 narrow columns. In this case, we're kind of limited to our margin that we're provided with, the specs, but I want to show you, if you were breaking away with a 3-column grid, what that would look like. So this is a 3-column grid with, and then your gutter space is that white space in between the columns of text. All right. Now the 3-column grid also provides for a really elegant layout, and big stories can be laid out in this way as well. So you can break this column with some pull out quote or spread across 2 columns. This is a great tool to break a page a little bit and then add some splash to the page. So in a 3-column layout, your number of characters should drop way below 60. Ideally, the number would be around 40 or 50 characters, or you can reduce the type. It does need to be portrait. That's a good question, Ashley. It does need to be portrait, and it'll be a little easier to do anyways. If you do landscape, you're going to need probably twice the amount of content that you guys were asked to write in week 2. So it's to save you time, do it in the portrait. Great question. All right, let me show you also how layouts can be structured. You can go up to 4 columns, which after about 4 columns of text, I think you're kind of, I wouldn't go beyond 4 columns for your layout. But here's an example of a 4-column layout. You've got your 4 small columns, and that can make for some interesting layouts for sure. But I want you to consider font size, tracking, leading. I'm going to be looking for spacing. And then I would keep the color of the text black, but if you want to add color to your layout, it can be in any of the graphics that you use, and then you can give color to your subheaders, to your headline, to your byline, pull out quote. There's places to make splashes of color, but for the most part, make the body text black, I suggest. It's easier to read. All right, and then I just want to remind you of one of the rules we went over. Clearly indicate the paragraphs, but be careful not to upset the integrity and the visual consistency of the text. If you're going to put a hard return between paragraphs, please make sure that they are consistent. If you're going to put a hard return between paragraphs, either use a subheader or don't. But if you're going to use a subheader, I kind of would pick either one. Use a hard return and an indent, or hard return or an indent on your paragraph to kind of separate it. So doing both of them, I kind of saw both of them being used when you guys were doing week 3 typesetting on the assessment, and it would be better if you just picked one or the other. So the 2 most common ways of indicating paragraphs are indenting or inserting an additional space between the paragraphs. So pick one or the other. Yeah, it says only choose one type of indication just to keep the text flowing. Any more than that, it kind of starts looking messy. And then limit your drop cap or enlarge caps to the beginning of the paragraph only. I don't want to see drop caps for every subsection you have. So you only need one, okay? Are there any questions? All right. Okay, perfect. Well, it's good to know. I'm glad. I'm glad. And let's see. Are we all familiar with how to do a drop cap? Yes? Okay. Perfect. That will be required. How do we do a pull quote? Okay, well, let me show you how. Let's talk about a pull quote, and then I'll show you how to do a drop cap, Ashley. A pull quote is just something interesting that kind of breaks up the monotonous columns of text, because if you have 3 or 4 columns of text just running straight on the page, there's nothing interesting about it. And to be honest, if you were flipping through a magazine or whatever, you'd probably pass right over it. I mean, we kind of gravitate to the more visually appealing layouts. So use contrast techniques to pull out the quote. Maybe use color, font size can be larger, maybe the font style or the placement can be interesting. Make sure you have plenty of space around the pull quote text and not to interrupt the text in an uncomfortable way. So let's go back to our InDesign. We're going to be jumping around a little bit, but I do want to show you. So when you have to, I'll do 3 columns. Get some text in there. And I want to make sure that my smart guides are on and they snap into place. I'm going to make sure that they're all lined up. So I'm just going to lay out 3 columns of text here real quick, just to kind of demo. All right, so I have my 3 columns of text. I want to take a pull-out quote, and it can be from my article. I'll just kind of copy some words here. You want to put it in a different text box because this will help with the formatting. And then it usually has quotes at the beginning and at the end, so it's, you know, it's a quote. You can highlight it and then say all my font right now is in a serif font. I can keep the serif font, but what I'll do is I'm going to do like an italic, okay, or maybe a bold italic to kind of set it, make it different. I'm trying to contrast what I've got here, and then I'm going to do a different color. Let's do red. Red would be a good color against black. And then I'll make the font larger. That's another way. Not too large, but you know, just something to add some interest. And then I'm going to place it, I want it to overlap I'm going to place it in the direct center of my column. So it overlaps evenly. So I centered it with the page, and thanks to my smart guides, that line, that purple line is kind of saying this is the center of the page, okay? And then up top here, it gives me a wrap around. So what this means is it says wrap everything around this box. So by clicking that, it kind of, the text now wraps around my pull quote. Did you see that? And it says wrap around the object or the shape. This is also a jump object. There's lots of different kind of bounding that you can do, but this box, and then if you want more space, between your text, so right now it looks like my my text is running into each other. Do you see that there? They're kind of touching. They're not very spaced out. What I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a white box or just a box, and I'm going to evenly place it around my pull quote. It's going to be wider than my text box, and I'll group those together. I'll kind of pull them together. Now I'm going to set it in the center of my page. And by doing that, it gives me much more even amount of space around my article. And by doing that, it also kind of fills in space. By doing that, it'll kind of spread out your text to the next page. So are there any questions with how I did that? For the most part, yeah, italics are great. It's a great way to offset the regular font that you're using. Here, I didn't go too large. I just wanted it to be kind of a nice accent, and the color is going to pop. It kind of breaks up those boring columns of text here. Now, I don't have to place it in the center. If I wanted to place it within my columns of text, I could do that too. And the way that I would do that would be to kind of, it'd have to be the same size as the column, but I would do that as well. So I wouldn't need the bounding box. I would just place that. Yeah, and then I wouldn't use the extra box that I did, because that was just for the center to kind of evenly space out the pull quote. But because this is going to be in my column, I just made sure it was the same width as my column. And then, yes, you can turn on the wraparound bounding box if you want, just in case you need any extra space. So that's also one option that you can do. All right, so you can do that, or you don't even have to put it in the columns of text if you don't want to. What you can do is, if you had some graphic, or this could be your graphic, you can kind of have it go across 2 columns like that. You could do something like this. But whatever you do, it does need to be even. So I'd need to line up my text boxes evenly like that. So there's a lot of different places. Yeah, it doesn't have to be in between columns. It can be in its own column if you wanted. It can be across 2 columns. It could even be across 3 if you wanted to. It's just a nice way to break up the text, but we just want even amount of space around it. That's all. Like that. And even I've seen them used outside of the article as a little bit of as art, but it never goes beyond your column. See, I don't want it to extend over your margin line. I want it to always be within your margin line, even with one or two of the columns, okay, at least. It could be at the top if you had some art or graphic here. We don't want too much gap or space between it. We don't want it to look too disconnected. All right, does that give you kind of an example? Pull-out quotes are kind of flexible. You do have a lot of room. It could even be, you know, at the bottom of the article. It's just to kind of break up your text. It gives some color, some interest to the page. Okay, it can generally be anywhere you want to place it. Yes, you can. The rule of thumb is 1 per page. So I wouldn't do like 4 pull-out quotes on a page. You can have 1 per page. So sure, 1 pull-out quote. You only need 1 to meet the grading requirements, but 1 per page is just all that you need. But that's a great question, Ashley. Good question. All right, so there's that. While I have this up, I'll go ahead and talk to you a little bit about the baseline grid. I kind of touched on this last week, but there is a gross error that I will be looking for that I see often. Tell me what's wrong. What do you see here? I'll zoom in. As you're looking at the articles of text, what do you see?
They aren't uniform.
They're not uniform. Now they may be the same size, but why? What's throwing it off here? If I grabbed a ruler here and I placed it directly under the first column, the first sentence of the first column, do you see how the rest of my text, if you move into the other columns, are getting kind of cut off by that ruler? They're not lining up exactly. So we need to fix that, and that's where a baseline grid comes in. Same thing here at the bottom. This is oftentimes a gross error too that's made. And it's a rookie mistake. It's because we haven't learned how to do baseline grids yet, but we're gonna learn how to do it here, because the point is we want to get all of the columns of text on the same baseline, the horizontal baseline. So this is how we're going to set it up. So once you've laid out your columns of text, they're evenly placed between your margins. They're the same size, same everything. What you're going to do is you're going to go to View and scroll down to Grids and Guides. It's kind of at the bottom of your View drop-down menu. And then I want you to click on Show Baseline Grid. Okay, now if this does not display right away, that usually means you need to fix a few things. So I want you to see if it'll show up. So can you, you don't even have to have text on your page to see this. Just go to View, go to Grids and Guides, and click on Show Baseline Grid. So do that for me. Did it show up on your screen?
It did not, without text.
Okay, so Ashley, if you would share your screen, I'll use you as an example on how to troubleshoot, because it didn't show up on mine either, so I had to go do some settings.
I don't know how to do that.
Okay, if you click on that dual window icon, it says share screen. It's kind of got that mountain range or the pyramids. I don't know what that picture is. Do you see that icon? Share screen, the 2 windows. There you go. And then you'll just pick your Illustrator. Awesome. Okay, so hers didn't show up right away. So there's a few things you can check. Go to View, or I think it might be View. Go to View. And then make sure you're in the right preview mode, but it looks she is in the right preview mode. So what you're going to need to do next is go to your preferences. So if you'll go to InDesign at the top, preferences, go down to grids. right there. Click on that. And this is how you're going to set up your grids anyway. So I'm just going to use you as you're going to be in the driver's seat today. So you can choose a color for your grids. I like blue because it's different from the text and everything, but you can pick a color. You can give it a certain starting point. Usually I like to start where the margin's going to start. So just use the top margin increment that you're given in your final project instructions, and that can be your starting point. Top of the page, you'll keep that the same. Now here's what's very important. Once you decide on the type of font and your leading, you're going to want the increment where it says increment every. That is going to need to match your leading. Now we don't need that right now. I'm just showing you how to get it to display. So if you'll go back to your preferences and then go back to grids. Now the view, the view threshold at the very bottom there says 75%. You want that to be a very small number, so just put 20%. That's just saying that anything above 75 is not going to show up on the baseline grid. So I'll just pick a really low number, and that should make it show up. You should be good. So hit OK. There they are. All right. So the baseline grid is pretty much set up for you. It's a little off because we haven't put in our measurements of where we want it to start. But once you have laid out your text, now go ahead and draw a text box for me, if you will. And then go to, I think it's object, let me see. Nope, let me see what it's called. Oh, type, go to type, sorry. Go to type and then insert or fill with placeholder text. We're just going to do this as an example for now. All right, so you've got some random text in there, but it's not all lining up with your baseline grid. As you can see, some of it's kind of getting cut off. The lines are running through the text. So we want to make sure that this is all organized. So you're going to select the column, or let's see, highlight the text. Just double click in there. And you can hit Control A or Command A, or you can highlight it like she did. And then go to your paragraph control settings, just to the far left underneath your colorful red, yellow, green dots at the top left. Do you see that? There's an A and then there's a P. P is the paragraph settings. Go to P, paragraph formatting. Just click on that. Did you click? I think it's not selected there. There you go. All right, and then go all the way to the right of that column. And you see those columns, the column icons under Publish Online. Do you see that? It's at the top there, right there. If you click that, that aligns to baseline grid. So click that, and now it's going to align everything for you. Go ahead and undo. Can you hit Command Z or Control Z? There we go. And make sure, let's not highlight the text. Let's do something different. Just have the box selected. You can just click on it with your arrow. There you go, your selection tool. And then go back to your, oh, it probably won't let you do that, huh? Okay, go ahead and highlight it again. So it's probably gonna just, it's gonna make us highlight the text, so. There you go, and then go back to that part. There you go. And now you can adjust your leading. You want to tighten that up a little bit, but it is a good way to kind of keep everything organized, okay? So now everything kind of snaps into that baseline grid. Now this will be different based upon what your leading is. So you can make your leading smaller, and you just need to go back into your grid settings and make sure your leading matches your increment every section. So great job. Thank you so much for being in the driver's seat. I'll show you real quick here. So I've got mine are uneven right now, just like Ashley's were. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight my text, and I'm going to go to all balance columns. Oops. Highlight it all, go to my paragraph control settings, and then I'm going to click on Align to Baseline Grid. And so it does the same thing. So what I want to do is make sure that my leading is tightened, because right now it says my leading is 14. So I want to make my leading 12, because here's the reason why. Because if you go into your preferences and go to grids, you want your increment every to match your leading, okay? So those numbers have to match. You can also make your font size smaller if you want to make it a little bit more spaced out, just like that. All right, so this is how we set up our baseline grid. This is how we do our columns. And yeah, I think that's what, are there any questions about this? Now, if you don't want to look at the, while I'm waiting for questions to come in, if you don't want to see the baseline grid and it gets a little too busy, you can just hit W on your keyboard, and that kind of gives you the preview mode. It kind of shows you what everything looks like without the guides and all the grid lines and everything. It kind of cleans it up so you can kind of have a better view of what's going on. But you will I'm going to be grading for this right under here. Is there a perfect flush line under your horizontal lines, or if there was an invisible ruler line there, does your text end and start at the same place? Same with the top here. I want it to all be even. And you can also check yourself once you kind of snap those, align those grid, your columns and the way I showed you. You can also use your rulers to kind of make sure your text boxes are lining up correctly. If you don't want to see the baseline grid, once you've already set it up and your columns are snapped into place, you won't need to see it. So you can just go back to View, Grids and Guides, and then hide baseline grid. So you don't need to see it if you don't want to. Looks like we've got a comment. Thanks, Terry, for coming. Appreciate it. All right, so let's go ahead and stop the share. We're going to go back into our PowerPoints. We can touch on a few things. I'm going to show a video here in just a minute. It's a longer video, but it is something that's required for the final project. So I do want you guys to see it. Okay, so we talked about captions. Captions are just what you'll see, small amounts of text underneath a picture or a graphic, just to kind of explain what it is or who took it. You are not going to need to include this for your final project. It's just something to know. If you were in the newspaper or magazine industry, you would need to include one. All right, let me go to that video here real quick. And I'll play it, and then we're gonna go we'll probably take our 10-minute break after I show the video. But I want you guys to see it because this is part of the final. The link is under the final project. Let me share the screen. All right. So we'll start here. And tell me if you can hear it.
Why not do it yourself?
Oops, let's skip the ad. There we go.
And then make sure controls checked if you don't see that. And so you can make the text larger, and you can format. We'll be going over the different ways to format the text as well. But a shortcut, let's just say it was at 12 point by default. You just wanted to make it larger to go across the entire page here, margin to margin. What you could do, notice that this text frame, if I click and drag around, it moves around it like an object as if it was a shape or a photo. But if I put it in the corner here and click and drag the corner to resize it, the text doesn't resize with it. What you can do is hold down Control on the PC or Command on the Mac and click and drag it out, and it will resize the font. And it can distort it vertically or horizontally. So hold Shift to maintain the original text proportion from width to height. And so then it quickly will go across there to align with the rest of the text. So that's pretty useful. Another thing you can try is, let's just say this was, right now it's 56.28 points. I should say it was, say, 24. Select it all. And if you hold down Control on the PC or Command on the Mac and press the left and right greater than or less than symbols on the keyboard, you'll see it makes the text and the actual text box smaller. That's just holding Control on the PC or Command on the Mac. If you add Shift to it, so hold Control Shift on the PC, Command Shift on the Mac, it will only resize the text. So that's a shortcut. And if you hold down Alt on the PC, Option on the Mac, as well as Control on the PC, Command on the Mac, it will make the text frame and it just jumps up much more quickly. And you can hold all three down, Shift, Control, Alt on the PC, Shift, Command, Option on the Mac. And it makes just the text larger, but it jumps up in sizes, intervals you can see of 10. So it goes from 28 points to 38 points, 48, 58, and so on. So I would say the default is just Control Shift on the PC or Command Shift on the Mac. And it just goes in intervals of 2 points, as you can see there. And if we need to adjust it up here, just make it something else, we can always type it in up there. So that's inserting text as far as pull quotes or sidebars or titles and other elements that we're just going to type the text in. Usually when you're placing in a story, though, you will place it from a Word document or some other kind of word processor document. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to click and drag that off to the side. Go to File, Place, and then find under the Support Files document and just choose Alice in Wonderland book times. This is just public domain text, so we can use it. And you'll notice it turns the cursor into a preview of the beginning of the text. And if I just click and let go, it places the text, but you'll see way down here there's a little red cross. That means there's more text to place, but it hasn't placed it. If I go to the Pages panel, you'll see here we only have one page in this document right now. So I'm going to go Edit Undo. And so this is as if we went to File, Place again. And this time I'm going to hold Shift, and you'll notice it adds that little arrow to the cursor icon. So holding Shift, click. Now what it does is it places the entire text by adding more pages. So this is now a 53-page document instead of a one-page document because I held Shift as I placed it in. It just placed the entire Word document into InDesign. So I'm going to press Control Z on the PC or Command Z on the Mac, and that will be the same thing as Edit Undo. And so let's just say we wanted to place this in the columns, though. Well, what you can do is go to Layout, Margins and Columns, if we didn't add these when we created a new document. And where columns number, let's just do 4 columns with a 1 pike gutter. And if I just click and let go, all it does is it places it into this column. So then I would need to click this red cross icon at the bottom, click it in the next one, click red cross. And you could also say you wanted one to go across 2, you could do that, or you could just click and drag. Either way, you'll notice it's not adding more pages because we're not holding Shift. So now I need to create a new page, and this one doesn't have margins and columns. You need to add those to that. Let's just say, let's do 5 on that one. And if you go back here, click the red cross, go to page 2, click that in, and so it flows it through. The problem is, it just, we keep having to do this. What you can do is hold Shift, then it will flow all the way through. But on the third page, it doesn't have any columns because we didn't add any by default when we created the new document. So in our projects in this course, we'll be creating new text boxes, new text frames, and we'll also be flowing text in different ways. But one design principle we want to look at is alignment. So we do want text to be aligned. So if I zoom in here, and this is just one way to place a text, we'll go over another way in a bit. If you see rulers up here, if you don't, just go to View, Show Rulers. And so if I hover over the ruler and click and drag down, and just align this along the bottom of that text in the second column there. And just use the arrows on the keyboard or click and drag. And we want to align all of this text with that second column there. So it's all aligned. I'm going to just resize this a little bit. There we go. So you'll notice these columns, use the hand to move over here. And this is technically the title we'd put at the top. But so now this text is all aligned. The difference between a professional publication and an unprofessional publication, one of the things is things like aligned text, spelling errors, of course, overall design, aesthetics, but aligning text is one thing that people getting into editorial design at the beginning really need to pay attention to. So that's one way to place in text and align it. I'm going to go ahead and delete all these pages, or actually let's just close this out. Go to File New again, File New Document. Let's just have one column, so not like 4 columns or anything like that. This is another way to create columns though. So go to File, Place, and do Alice in Wonderland Book Times. And this one I'm going to click and drag out like so. And if we wanted the text to flow again into another page, we could click there. But this example, I just want to show you how to create some columns without adding columns up here under Layout, Margins, and Columns. So this is selected. If you look up at the top here on the control panel, this says 1. If you hover over, it'll say number of columns and the gutter. If I click up there to make it 2, now we have 2 columns over here, and these are automatically aligned. The gutter, we can make the gutter larger. You'll see it gets larger over here, so now it's over 2 picas, and so on. So you can create multiple columns and move this around as one text frame instead of using just the column guides on the page. So that's 2 ways of having columns in a layout. So some of these other options over here, I'll show you what these do. I'm going to use the Type tool over here, click in somewhere, press Control or Command A to select it all, and then I'm going to hold Shift and click here. So I'm deleting all the other text that we don't see, and I just want to make it uneven. So I'll show you what this does. So this left-hand side is obviously longer than this side. The text ends right there. If you see over here, if you hover over, this says balance columns and then unbalanced columns. Well, unbalanced is the default in that text is going to go all the way to the bottom of that text frame, and then it's going to start back up here. If you do balance columns, then it makes it symmetrical as best it can. So it's a little bit unaligned at the bottom, but I'm just going to try to balance it there. If you hover at the top here where it says align top, by default, it's starting at the top, of course. If you click the one below it, align center, what that is going to do is it's going to center it vertically. So there's some space above it and below it. And if you go to align bottom, it's just going to align it to the bottom, of course. And then the 4th one is justify vertically, kind of like we're going to get into.
Okay, so it looks like there's just another 2 minutes in, and if we have time, we'll finish it. But I did want to just kind of touch on the columns a little bit. We'll talk about that when we come back from our break. So Ashley was asking, do you, I think one is, do you have to use the margins, go to layout, margins, and columns to set up your document? Now, as we saw in the video, there are different ways, but it's a great tool to use. So as he showed, you go to layout, margins, and columns. And then her other question was, well, do we have to adjust the gutter, or how do you adjust the gutter? And the gutter, or you can just adjust it here. You can include the gutter spacing and increase it or decrease it. The number of columns here, you'll see it automatically adjust on your page. So if I wanted a 3-column grid, this is what I'm going to use. And then my gutter, I like about at least 1 pica of space. I don't know what that converts to in inches, but I hope, you know, it's a good, I don't know, let's see, 1/8 of an inch of spacing here. So kind of give yourself enough. Oh, sorry, Ashley. So I'm breaking up. Can you hear me now? Am I coming in clear? I apologize for that. If I break up again, please let me know. All right, so basically you can adjust the gutter here. As you can see, the higher I go, the space between my columns increases, and the lower that I go, the space between my columns decrease. All right, so now that I have my columns set up here, this is how he did it by going to layout, margins, and columns. But what I'm going to do is you can undo that, and then he showed a great way, a great demo in the video of how to do it without needing to go to your columns. So what you would do, he had just one text box, highlight all the text, and then you can go over here. There's a little icon under your paragraph formatting controls where you can increase your amount of columns within the text box. But to do that, I do recommend expanding the box across from margin line to margin line, and then you can adjust your columns. And that can go within your actual text box. So however many columns you want. Now, when you have uneven text here, whereas my article doesn't end where the others end, what I'm going to want to do is click on right here, this balance columns, or you can go click on this right here, balance columns, and it will do its, the best it can. You can center them. It'll try to line them up the best it can. But this is a great easy way to do that. But also use the baseline grid to help you. And then Ashley, what other question did you ask that was really good? Does that put? You asked how to put in the gutter. So we kind of showed the two places you can put the gutter in. But I personally don't like doing the columns within the text box. You have a little bit more freedom if you do set your page up in columns rather than using it within the text box. There's no right or wrong. It's just whatever personal preference. I'm just used to doing it this way. I like the purple lines. It kind of helps define things. If you're placing a text, your text will automatically snap into place. I love that. You'll just click on your purple margin line and then lay everything out. Now, to do a drop cap, let me show you. You will be required to do this. You'll need a drop cap. You'll go to your character formatting controls, and
My balance columns isn't on my thing like yours was.
it wasn't? Okay, why don't you share your screen and let me take a look at what you have. All right, go ahead and click share screen if you can. There you go. Perfect. All right, so that's aligning to the baseline grid. So if you just select your actual column, not highlight the text, click on the column itself or the text box itself. And then if you'll go to your character formatting controls, let's see. Okay, 1 second. This is all muscle memory. So let me go back to mine real quick and see what I did. You should have that option under your, okay. Go to, let's see, I see that you don't have it. Okay, select your box, and then what I want you to do, we'll have to probably just find it in our drop-down menu. So if you'll go to layout, the drop-down menu layout, and oh, you know what? Maybe because the baseline grid is on. I don't think that should have anything to do with it. Go to your margins and columns because you don't have any columns yet. So once you click on number of columns, go to that. Give it 1 or 2 or however many you want. Okay, hit OK. And then click on your column of text. Let's see if it will. Try doing another text box, if you will. You click on. You have that little red cross at the bottom there. Can you click on that? There you go. Use your selection tool to, perfect. And then click on that and then just click another column of text. There you go. Now select both of them or one of them. Should it bring it up? See. I've never seen that before. Sorry, I'm just troubleshooting. Maybe go to the far right, top right, where it says, go to your, that little wheel, customize control panel. Go ahead and click that. Let's see if we have everything we need. Can you scroll down, see if everything's selected? Looks like it is. All right, hit OK. The only thing I could think of is maybe take off your baseline grid view. So go hide the baseline grid for just a minute.
How do I do that again?
Sure. Go to View. And then go to Grids and Guides. And then it should just hide baseline grid. Go back to View real quick. I'm going to see if it'll display.
Go back to what you cut out.
Sorry, go back to View, the drop-down menu. Go back to View. Okay, and then hang on one second. I want to see if there's any setting in here that will allow us to include it. That's so strange. I don't see. I don't know why it wouldn't be on your settings. Do you have the current version of InDesign?
As
Maybe?
far as I know.
As far as you know? Okay. Well, you know what? I don't have the answer, but I will look it up. I'll see if I can figure it out on mine, see why it's displaying on mine and not yours. Let's go ahead and take our 10-minute break, and I will do some research and see if I can find that answer for you. Does that sound good? All right. Are there any questions other than this? This is probably a good question because some of you are going to have that issue. I'm not sure why it's displaying on mine and not yours. Let me go to mine real quick. Another thing I could think of is it's probably just in our workspace, like how it's being displayed.
Could it be that I'm not in typography workspace?
Possibly. I'm trying to see what workspace I'm in. I'm in the digital publishing workspace, so that's the one I'm in. Let's see, and then go to window control, drop down window control. That's selected, so that's okay. Click on it again, just make sure it's displaying. I was just trying to see if all your settings match up with mine.
I've had certain problems like that before where like certain tools that you show, I don't have. And so I kind of just BS my way through and kind of made it hopefully like make it look the same.
Well, there should still be a way to align and balance the columns. So let me look it up real quick for you because I haven't seen that before. You're kind of the first that it. Only thing I can think of is just going to making sure your margins and columns are set up, but it looks like you set it up correctly. So let me do some research. We'll take our 10-minute break, and then when we come back, hopefully I have an answer for you. So, all right. Thanks, Ashley. I appreciate it.
Yep, no problem. That'll be one.
All right. We'll adjourn and hopefully have an answer when you come back.
All right.
So go ahead and close out your screen, and we will go ahead and take our 10-minute break here, and then we'll come back and we'll do a little bit more. All right, so we are back from our break. We're going to go ahead and finish up our slides and maybe do another tutorial. So what I want to do is catch up on the comments here. So I found, Ashley, did that help, the going to object text frame options and seeing if that helped? Did that give you some help? Okay, and then Ashley asked if she could resubmit assessment 3 from last week to kind of boost her grade. And yes, you can. I do allow that, but here's the thing. The only, my resubmission policy is that you have to sign it off with me during a multi-session or go to the Student Success Center and have them sign off on the changes, meaning you'll have to show them my comments and my feedback and then show them your final product and have them help tweak it and see if you've missed anything. Because I had some students say, well, that's silly, and I don't have to have a resubmission policy, but I like to do it because it allows you guys to learn from your mistakes. I learn better that way anyways, when I can make changes to my work and then resubmit them. But what's happened in the past is that students will only do a few of the comments or maybe not see all of them or action all of them and then kind of expect points back. So this way it just kind of cuts out that part where I say, oh, you missed that part, go finish it and then resubmit it again. We don't have that kind of luxury. So now it's just sign it off with me before you resubmit it, or sign it off with someone at the Student Success Center, because they will email me when you come in. And when I get that email, I'll go in and adjust the grade. So that's my only requirement on resubmissions. But yes, up to 1 week late, you could resubmit something. And week 3 submissions can be turned in on Saturday. But again, come visit me on Wednesday at the multi-session or visit anyone at the Student Success Center to kind of help you. Does that answer your question? Perfect. Yeah, and this is an excellent way to get those points back on assignments too, because sometimes it's a learning curve. We're not quite sure what we're doing when we go into the assignments. I think even with the tutorials and stuff, it's a lot easier said than done when you start working on it yourself. All right, so let's just talk a little bit more. I want to just kind of talk about the CRAP model, or the CARP, or it's also called CRAP, contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity. Let's talk about this because this is something you will be graded on during the final project. Oh, and then Ashley made a comment. She said, I've never attended a multi-session, so I don't know how they work. Multi-sessions are just kind of like office hours. So I'm logged in for 2 hours, and it's just come in as you want to come and go between that time. And there's no lecture. It's just come ask questions, get help on assignments. If you want some one-on-one time with me, it's a great opportunity to get some tutoring. Or you can kind of sign off on assignments or kind of check your grade with me. I have a lot of students come in and say, will you just look at this before I submit it? I also do that too. So it's not a structured class. It's just my office hours, really. And that's why when you go and attend a multi-session from someone else, it's the same thing. It's just their office hours. They're there to help answer your questions. So, and you don't have to attend mine specifically. It's just a great way to kind of interact with an instructor and get some professional help. Yeah, even with another teacher, it's just their office hours. There's no class, and oftentimes not a lot of students attend the multi-session. So it could just be you and the instructor, and you might just have some one-on-one time. So I definitely recommend going. And then if you attend a multi-session, if you attend a multi-session and you can't make the one that I teach, that's fine. Just go onto that schedule under the announcements page. I think it's all the way at the bottom. But just click on that. It will show you lots of instructors hold their 2-hour blocks all throughout the day, all different times and different days of the week. And then if none of those work, there's always the Student Success Center that you can just pop in at any time. So yeah, and that's a great question. Not many students know what a multi-session is. So and it's not recorded or anything. It's just basically, it's just office hours. So does that help answer your question? All right, awesome. These are great questions, Ashley. I'm glad you're asking them. I guarantee you there's more than one student out there that's watching this recording that's probably had the same question in mind. All right, we're going to talk a little bit about the CRAP model because it is one of the requirements in the final project that you will need to know what it is. So let me get set up here. All right, so this is just helping you build, just to have a better experience with design principles. So I'm sure we've all seen a good and a bad design. You kind of know it when you see it, right? When you see something that catches your attention. Yeah, and so maybe you can help me teach this, Ashley, because it's not always that you can objectively point out the qualities or flaws of a design. Sometimes you just look at it, you're like, not so much, or that's really cool. And sometimes you can't put your finger on it. But when you're a designer, you kind of have to be able to have that instinct and know how to lay something out. But sometimes it's not always instinct. It is also just kind of a formula that we like to include. And so it's contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity. I have some examples I'll show later on, but right now let's talk about contrast. To contrast something, what does that mean? Just in general.
Two different colors on the color wheel.
There you go, two different colors on the color wheel. It's just something that stands out, right? Contrast is all about making distinct elements. It could be two different fonts. It could be two different colors, maybe like on my slide, the orange and white right now, that's contrast. The orange on the white background is contrast. And so that's how I'm creating emphasis. That's how I'm making things stand out. So contrast is used to drive a user's attention to maybe a specific element in your design.
Or shapes works too.
And shapes are great. Contrast is excellent if you kind of do something kind of off the grid a little bit. There's lots of different ways you can add contrast. It just basically leads and directs the eye of the reader through your path. You're telling them what you want them to look at, what's important. That's why on your grand opening invitation that you designed, you had to kind of highlight the important information, right? Maybe make Christina Aguilera because they mentioned an A-list star's name. You want to be able to highlight the name and maybe make it bigger or put it in color or just kind of make it stand out because that's an important element. Okay, so besides differentiated colors, contrast can be established using different element types, shape, size, and much, much more. So Ashley, you mentioned the color wheel. Let me see if I can pull this picture in. Okay, so here's just an example. This contrast can be established using a combination of colors that lie opposite to each other. So the opposite of this violet, this purple at the bottom here, what would be its contrasting color?
Yellow.
The yellow would be the direct opposite, right? You can even go adjacent to it and use an orange. Orange and yellow are great complementary colors that add contrast to each other. So that's just an example. So if you use this cool blue on the left, the contrasting color would be this lighter, or I guess darker orange. So that would be a contrasting color. So as a rule of thumb, high contrast is required when text color and background color is required between text color and background color. So you wouldn't use a light background on a light, or a light font on a light background. You wouldn't be able to read it very well, right? Nothing would stand out, just kind of blend. So that's kind of why they say to do that. So let me show you another example. This is an example of, bad contrast. Let me see if it'll pull into my slide real quick.
Can different fonts be used as contrast too?
Yeah, absolutely. Different fonts are a great way. You know, the sans serif against a serif font, that's a great way to do it. You definitely want to make sure you're picking complementary fonts, but absolutely. So kind of like I did the pull quote, we were using a serif font, but I italicized it and bolded it, so that was adding contrast. I even went a step further and made it red, and that was a contrast. So yes, fonts can be elements of contrast as well. So this is an example. This is a bad contrast using complementary colors. So blue and red, this doesn't stand out. It almost hurts the eyes when you look at it. So we're going to take that one off. But let me show you a good example and pull this in. So when you see this example, this is a good example because it's using two different shades of the same color used in the example above. So basically, it lightened up the background and used a darker font on the top. Why is it contrasting well? Well, because it's easier to read that dark font against a light background. So, and kind of opposite with the bottom. Dark background, light font. Whereas the example I showed you before, it was dark on dark. So that just didn't work. So this is a good example of contrast, okay? So a quick way to know if your design has optimum contrast is just by looking at its grayscale version. So you can easily do this in Photoshop. We're not going to get into that, but when you were creating your logos in week 1, you had to use black and white, right? So that's kind of how you know you have good contrast, if you can make elements stand out and look unique without using color. So sometimes color can be a crutch, but in this case, for our layout, it's actually going to help emphasize certain elements. Yeah, I'd love to see it, Ashley. Maybe after I finish up with these slides, you can share your screen and kind of step us through a few examples. I'd love that. That would be awesome. Okay, so here's an example of a layout that uses contrast. Please tell me what contrasting elements do you see that creates emphasis? What do you see in this layout? Probably the first thing you would notice is the bright yellow on a dark gray, charcoal gray background. That bright yellow, that pop of color, that adds some really great contrast. And it's also contrasting with that white. So the white and the yellow pop really nice on that dark background, but the yellow is kind of offsetting, and it's adding just some, it's adding emphasis. Whereas if everything was just white on a dark background, it would look pretty boring. Nothing would stand out. And then, yeah, there's also the difference of font. There you go. I love the yellow quote marks around that white pull quote. That's really cool. It's just kind of emphasizing, again, that yellow that's coming out on this, or it's just emphasizing the contrast a little bit more. So, and this is often common on a black and white layout. There'll be one pop of color, red, yellow, whatever it is, that will stand out against that black and white look. All right, let's talk about, let me show you, let's see, size is another interesting way to add contrast. We talked about contrast in, oh, these aren't pulling in very well. Contrast in type, you asked, can you use different fonts to add contrast? Absolutely. And Kate, in this case, we're actually using different size of type. So you've got the large type and the small type, and that's a great way to add contrast. This is why we ask that the headline be so large on your article, because we want your headline to be large and then the article portion to be small to add contrast. Even the byline is really small under that headline, or the subheadline. So this is really a great way to add contrast. All right, I'm gonna blow through this real quick, and then I'm gonna go to the demo just to show you a few elements that you're gonna want to include. I would refer you back to week 3 because I showed you how to lay out a graphic illustration, how to display the artwork. So go look at week 3 and that demo. But this week, I'm just gonna show you just the basics of placement, where to put things, what to expect. All right, and then shape. Shape's another way to contrast. Let's talk about repetition real quick. We're running short on time. Repetition is how you maintain consistency in a design, okay? It helps users familiarize with the way that information is presented to them. So for instance, bullet lists are great uses of repetition. These are circular dots that present information. The repetition of dots kind of helps readers scan and read the list really easily and quickly too, kind of like what I've done here. See my bullet points. Awesome. Now, additionally, the repetition of elements is what gives an identity to design. So repetition kind of makes it feel, oh, hey, this thing's uniform. There's 2 pages here and it's one article, but everything feels like it flows really well. So it just creates this unity. What's another way that I can explain it? I'll take an example here of a badly designed website. Let me show you. There is no repetition to be found, which makes it bad. Okay, look at that. Kind of interesting, right? So although the above website, or this website has a lot of issues with its design, we're going to stick to talking about the lack of repetition. The website uses at least 4 different fonts, all of which have different sizes, so that's a big no-no. The color of the different text elements also is not consistent. They're using way too many colors. Remember, the rule of thumb is 2 to 3 colors. The images used are different font styles, ranging from different pictures. It's not uniform at all. And so let me show you an example of a good website layout, because it does use, so here's It uses a lot of repetition here. Notice the bullet points on the right-hand side. It's using subheaders as category dividers. All the headlines are the same size and font. All the body text is the same font. The pictures are uniform in size. So this contains just plain text, a few images, but with the repetition of font type, font size, font color, the style of images, all of this looks neat and really easy to read. And so it makes it very clean. Let's talk about alignment real quick. Oh, here's another example of repetition. They're kind of incorporating the circles. The circles as a design. This is a really cool layout that you could probably consider for your layout if you wanted to. Circles and shapes are a great way to emphasize your font. You can use the O's in your lettering and your typography of whatever character family you choose. But this is a great, or font family that you choose, this is a great way to kind of add some repetition, but visual interest as well. Okay, alignment. Another word for alignment is balance. Alignment just dictates the way that every element is placed in a design. So alignment is a concept that really advocates organizing information. The whole point is to create order. So with alignment, no element in a design is positioned arbitrarily. Everything is on purpose. So each element visually connects to other elements, leading to cohesiveness in a design. And this is really important. Let me show you an example. Let's another example into this slide here. Okay, here's, we were talking about shapes. So edge alignment naturally positions elements against a margin that matches up with the outer edges. So we went over this with our baseline grid, lining up our text lines on that horizontal plane. We also talked about organizing our columns. Center alignment places design elements so that they line up with one another on their center axes. And you might hear me say, oh, that design's great, but it's not centered to the page, just simply meaning it's not centered on a centered axis. But here we can see that it is. And this is what's really important about alignment. It's just making sure everything flows and is lined up correctly. So for text, different styles of alignment are left, right, centered, justified. Although left and right alignment are the most common when it comes to article layout, especially left, because we read from left to right. Centered alignment can work when there's not a great amount of text, like for your invitation designs. A lot of you did the center alignment. Let's see if I can show you an example. This is center alignment right here. So as you can see, the same style's kind of been applied to a big chunk of text. It makes it easy to read. It's just very well laid out because everything is aligned perfectly with the center of the page. There's balance to this design. All right. Here's another example of alignment and balance. You have a right aligned headline on the left side and right aligned text, but it's kind of, we want balance. So on the other side, we've got kind of the reversed alignment left and another body of text to balance out the portions of the page that have text. So it's just like a scale. You just want to make sure one side's not too heavy and the other side is. All right, the last thing on our list is proximity. Okay, another word for proximity is just grouping things. The principle of proximity says that elements that are associated with each other should be placed closely or grouped together, meaning that body text should be in columns next to each other, right? You wouldn't want a portion of your headline at the top of one page and then finish the sentence at the bottom of another page. We want to keep things together. Let me show you a great simple example. Now, an amateur designer might try to utilize the complete real estate of a design, so don't be afraid of white space because, you know, we're not amateurs. We know what we're doing. Kind of trying to spread out elements evenly throughout, but a design really will make it difficult for users to determine elements that are related to each other. So we want to stay away from that. Here's a simple example. While both the cards contain the same information, the way that it's presented is very, very different. The information on the card on the left has been distributed evenly, but the card on the right has the information placed with better structure because of alignment, and the related information points have been grouped together, meaning we've got the contact information at the bottom, and then we've got the address and the guy's name at the top. So that's what's really important. It's organized. It's just another way to kind of keep things grouped together. All right. We could go on and on about this. I'm going to go ahead and stop here. I'll show an example of it. We don't have time for the videos, so we are just going to comb through this. I'm going to go through the requirements that are on the final project, and I'm just going to kind of show you how to action them. Let me get my InDesign up. Give me 1 second. So many windows. All right, here we go. So here's InDesign. So before I start, are there any questions about those slides that we went over? Are we pretty good? Okay. So if I'm going to lay out, I'm going to want my headline. Headline is the first thing. I showed you how to do that really cool design last week, so I'm not going to go through it again, but I will show you just really quick. Okay, so here's my headline. And next, I'm going to need my byline. So I wrote an article on Helvetica. Next thing you're going to need is to put your name. So by Mrs. Woodland, I'm the author. That's what a byline is for. And your whole article needs to be in the font that you chose. But to add contrast, I'm going to do a bold on my headline and a small regular for my byline. Now your byline can be placed anywhere, but I want it to be lined up with the letters. If you're going to put it over here, I want it to be lined up with the end of your last letter, meaning let's grab a ruler. Here's where my A ends. I'm going to make sure my byline ends at that same point. See that? See how it's all lined up? Okay, it's not hanging off or hanging out anywhere. All right, so that looks very lined up, right? So that's my headline. I want a catchy headline, and don't just put Helvetica. I mean, do something that's, you know, give it a phrase or something. And then your byline is your name. Subheads are optional when you do structure your article. Your headline can reach across both pages if you want. If I were to do a headline across the page, I'd probably put this byline right under that side. Or you can put it underneath there. Okay. All right, now if I'm doing some columns of text, you already have an article written, so this shouldn't be too difficult for you to just place your article, but I'm going to go ahead and fill this with some placeholder text because I don't have an article to place. So I'm just kind of showing you here. Now I've got these columns of text. It's kind of boring, so what I'm going to do is add some subheaders. So history of Helvetica. Now this is where I'm going to add contrast. And I'm going to do a bold on this, and I'm going to give it a color. This is where your color comes in. What is your color palette that you're going to be using? I'm going to have another subsection here. Okay, and then I might have another subsection down here. But notice how I'm only doing, I'm not doing a hard return between the subheader and the text. And I'm not doing an indent, because if you're going to have a subheader, you should not need an indent. Remember, Rule 14 that we went over. Okay, I'm just coming up with some headlines to, right. So the headlines are kind of acting as kind of breaking up the text and acting as a visual element. Those are subheaders. They're optional. If you choose not to do a subheader, that's just fine. You can choose to just do a hard return to separate your paragraphs, but it's either a hard return or you can indent your paragraphs. Okay, but it has to be even indentation, or it's just kind of either or. All right. This is another way to kind of format your text. Let's see, what else do you need? This is body copy. Body copy can be in a serif font. I recommend Times New Roman or something. And I usually, a good rule of thumb for size, I would not go over 12-point font, just because it's so big. You can even do smaller. Those of you who have shorter articles or didn't meet the requirement for the word count, you're probably going to need to add more content, because I don't want you increasing the size of the font to fill in the space. We want it to be, you know, pretty average, and about 8 to 12 font is about the right size. I showed you how to do a pull quote. Folio, page number. So let's go to our, let's go to layout pages. And actually, I want to go to window pages. You go to your drop-down menu window, click on pages right here. Your pages will open up here. And then if you go to your master, a master, double click on that page here at the top. And we're going to add a folio. So the folio is usually the footer, the page numbers. You could grab your text box, and you'll know you're in your master when you draw your text box. All right, and I'm going to put it here at the base of the page. And wherever your cursor happens to be. So on the left page, I want my page number to be on the left side. On the right page, I want my number to be on the right side, right-hand side. You want to make sure your text box is evenly placed. And this is where you can put, if you go to type, insert special character, markers, current page number. Do you see that? Go to type, drop-down menu, insert special character, markers, and then current page number. By clicking on that, it will give you a little placeholder. You'll see a letter, it says A. That's fine, because you're only on your master. When you go to your page 2, you'll see there's a page number, okay? So there's that. And I usually like to position the number towards the bottom, usually below my margin. Let's see. You can even have your baseline grid set up if you wanted. All right, so there's that. And then I'm going to just, oops. I'm going to tab over this number, or this page. Oops, there we go. Kind of space bar it out until I get to where I want it to be. Now these do need to be even. You'll see the dotted line. So you want to make sure your text boxes line up at the right place. And this baseline grid is going to be very helpful. I'm getting my rulers to make sure they all line up correctly. Okay. So now that I've got my numbers placed, folio is the page number. You can also add other stuff like the name of your article. If you want, but to meet the requirement, you just need a page number, okay? So then when you go to page 2, it's there at the bottom. Now I need to do the same thing to the right-hand side. In this case, I'll just do the page number. So you've got page 2, or page number 2 and page number 3. Now I didn't go format the other side, so I'll have to do that so it matches the same font and page, the same font and font size. Okay. All right. Okay. So if we go back to our double click back on our pages 2 and 3, you'll see the page numbers are there. That looks good. That's the folio, the header and the footer displaying the name of the magazine or typography can accompany the folio. So that's kind of what I was showing you. You can either put the article name or you can put the magazine called typography. This usually needs to be formatted in a different font than your article. It usually is a lot smaller. So if you're using a 12-point font for the body text, I recommend going smaller, like 8 or even 9. You want a significant difference, again, contrast. And then you don't be afraid to kind of format it a little bit. So I'm going to use, just kind of make this italic. Just like that. You want even amount of space. Use your margins to kind of guide you. There's that. So when I go back to my article, I've got my folio, my page number, and I've also got the name of the magazine. In this case, it's called Typography. Okay. Put it and then somewhere in your article, you need to display the entire alphabet in both upper and lower case, plus the numbers 0 through 9. You can use regular, book, Roman, whatever font you're using. You can use other styles within the font family to display this. It can either be done creatively, like I showed you. Let me see if I can find an example for you. I did this layout last week and kind of showed you a visual way that you could display it. Here's one. Let's see if I can pull it in. Here's one way that I had it laid out during week 3. See, oh, it won't let me pull it. Hold on. Give me 1 second. Okay. All right, here we go. So this was the layout that I did to kind of show how you can kind of design off the grid a little bit. Now you can't use this graphic, you will have to create it. Follow my demo in week 3 to kind of see how I did this. But this was kind of a cool way to kind of do a headline if I were to use it. Over here. And your headline can take up a good portion of the page. So it should look like this once you're done laying it out. Week 3, I showed you how to style it. And it can go across both pages. So then you'll have, what it's supposed to look like is you'll have your columns of text here. Like this. All right, so this is kind of how you do it. And you can put your pull quote in the middle here, or you can hang it out here if you wanted your pull quote over here. So this is kind of a way that I showed you how you can style, because it's got your upper, lowercase, it's got your numbers, and it's just kind of a cool way. But you can Google layout, typography, magazine layouts, and there's tons of examples of how you can do this properly. All right, I see I've got a few comments. I'm going to go to the chat box and okay, so Ashley's asking, can we just put it in creatively in the header, like in a text box underneath? What did you want creative in the header? I'm sorry, I wasn't following.
The numbers and letters, the alphabet in 1 through 10.
Yeah, just so like what I've done here, you've got the name of the article Helvetica, and then the characters kind of are stringing across. So if you can find a way to do it creatively, absolutely. There's no real rule. It just needs to look like it's part of an article. It should be a little separate from, here's another magazine layout I'll show you. If it'll let me pull it. There's no real rule on, how it's supposed to look. It's just, I'm just trying to show you some examples of maybe, here is another example. So here was a design someone did. This was kind of creative, where they pulled it in. They did bold light. I mean, you don't have to do that, but they had the characters kind of looking like a keyboard. So this was kind of cool. And then they had the name of the article. This is kind of getting chopped off a little bit, but Helvetica. And that was a cool design that they did for the article. So you can get creative. I've had some students kind of just have it typed out really big on one of the pages like this. Show you. Okay, so just imagine this is Helvetica. I'm going to use a bold, and then I'm just going to increase the font size here. So you could format this, even this can be artwork. This is just kind of make the lettering a little tight and do something like this. Really, there's no rule to this. It's just kind of how you want to format it, but it needs to be lined up properly. And then I guess you could even take out the gaps there. That would even look better. So I'll let you be the judge of how you want to do it, but you can even make your text really large as part of the artwork if you wanted, or maybe over 2 columns, do the lowercase and uppercase version of the text, and then at the bottom you can, or at this column, you can do the numbers, 0 through 9. And then this could be even in a different color as to offer contrast, so it's not blending in too much. You just want it to make sense and kind of do your best on, use your judgment as to what, how you want it to look. Oops. Even be strung across the bottom, even like this. Could be smaller. There's a lot of different ways to, to make your typography the art of the article. So I hope this gives you some ideas as well. Let me check and see if we've hit all the points on the final project, and then I'm going to set you free and wish you the best. Let's see, that was the last one. So aside from using the CRAP model, placement, color, angle, there's lots of examples I showed, but just Google typography magazine layouts and you'll see there's a ton of them that you can, kind of mimic and kind of grab inspiration from. Are there any questions as to what's required? Any last comments before we close out here? All right, this was a lot of information. I hope you learned a lot from it, and please feel free to watch the recording if you need to catch up on anything. There is that 12-minute YouTube video that I did show you. We didn't have time to finish it, but it is up on the final project. I guess it's under the final project, so you can go click and watch that. That gives you a lot of tips on how to set up your document. So thank you so much for coming, Ashley. I appreciate your participation, and all those who are joining from home. And if you have any questions, email me, come to my multi-session, or go visit another one. Please get help from the Student Success Center if you get stuck. Really, we're here to help, and I want you guys to do your best. This is our last project for the mod, and let's do it strong. Let's end strong. There is a quiz that you need to take in place of the discussion. It's a reflection question, and or I guess it asks you like 2 or 3 or 4 questions. You will need to answer in detail. You'll be graded on your responses, not how you responded, but you'll be graded on grammar and the length and how detailed you were. So just make sure that you include your, enough detail in that. But 3 questions, Ashley says. So it's just 3, but it's worth 15 points, and it'll be an easy 15 points if you just go in and do it. So Good luck with everything, and I look forward to seeing your awesome layouts that you turn in. Thanks so much. We'll see you guys later.